Welcome to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott, and I have a fascinating channeling from Quo that deals with the concept of sub-densities. Within each density, as we are in third density, there are sub-densities. And in some ways, when I have read this in the Law of One, it implies a parallel reality sort of situation. We also talk about mixed contact, meaning sometimes people start channeling the Confederation and then the Orion groups get involved. And you see this with channelings all the time where they become negative. There's also a discussion of ADHD and the law of responsibility and blocking the yellow ray. I found this to be very fascinating. If you don't know, Quo is a principle of higher entities who communicate through a group called LL Research. And we have been studying and researching their messages to unlock very powerful spiritual knowledge. Stick around for the second channeling at the end of this episode, where you get an amazing discussion from Quo on the idea that thoughts become things and how that relates to our transition into third density to fourth density, and what it's like when thought becomes things now and in the future, and what it actually means. I got so much from this. In many ways, I think it answers the question of how we create our reality better than the previous episode where Quo addressed that question. This first channeling comes from September of 2021, very recently. In the beginning, Jim is channeling, saying, "I am Quo and greet each in love and light. And we are honored once again to be asked to join your circle of seeking. We join you in this seeking, and we are most appreciative of the opportunity to share our words and thoughts with you according to the questions that you have devised for this evening's session. We as always advise each here to use discrimination when listening to our words, our thoughts, our suppositions. We are your brothers and sisters, and we are not ultimate authorities. We are most grateful for your kind discernment to be behind any thought that does not serve you now. With that having been said, we would ask if there might be a query with which we may begin this session." They begin by asking, "Quo, I have one sent in from A1 that I have reworded a bit. In addition to the general 7 or 8 densities of our octave, Ra also describes sub-densities within each density. In regards to our current third density, can you describe these sub-densities in more detail? How do we experience them, and how can this knowledge help us on our spiritual journey? I am Quo, and am aware of your query, my brother." This is a query which has an answer that stretches to what you would call infinity. For each of your sub-densities within your third density illusion is composed of further sub-densities. 7 is the number which is critical in this overview of your third density experience. So within your third density are 7 sub-densities. Within each of these sub-densities are 7 more sub-densities, and so on. So that there is an infinity of refinement to your experience of this decision-making density. The decision that each of you seeks to make in a definitive way is the decision as to how you will polarize your consciousness to continue your journey of seeking past this third density illusion. As you're going about your daily round of activities, you are in contact with other selves, others such as are you, perhaps conscious seekers of truth, perhaps not yet conscious that they are also seekers of truth. In these interactions, you have the potential to be of service to these entities by interacting in a manner which is demonstrative of who you are, and who you are as a unique expression of the one infinite creator. Such interaction, whether in thought, word, or deed, has the potential to take upon itself a life, shall we say, of its own. This creation of thought, words, and deeds has reverberations that move into these sub-densities according to your exercise of what we might call your will to be of service, and your faith that service and growth and polarization are possible as the products of interacting with others. As you proceed further into relationships, you will discover that there are times of communication where there is clarity, times when there is misunderstanding, times when there is confusion. These may be seen as opportunities to grow in your own service to others, and thusly in your polarization of consciousness, as you engage in conversations with such entities in an attempt to share more of commonality, to resolve that of difficulty, to reduce that of confusion. You offer to yourself and to the other self the chance to process the catalyst that has brought you together in this shared journey of seeking the one Creator in all things. This is a process which redounds to the very basic nature of your being and every other entity's being, which is at the heart the one Creator. As you process the catalyst that brings you together, there is food for spiritual growth produced. Whether you are in the presence of another self experiencing this catalyst or alone in contemplation or meditation, your thoughts carry a weight that moves beyond the normal realms of third density experience. Moving into these sub-densities, where the thoughts may enhance your processing of catalyst, and discovering more harmony where there was disharmony, less confusion where confusion reigned supreme. These deeper levels, or sub-densities, of this third density are always available to each seeker of truth, and indeed to those who are not yet conscious seekers of truth, for all have contact with their own subconscious minds. In one fashion or another, and consciously and subconsciously, one may travel perhaps unbeknownst to the self to these deeper levels of the third density illusion and find sustenance there, and find that there is the quality of thoughts that are more enhanced and clarified, so that the clarity lends its growth potential to the seeker of truth, who means in all efforts to be of service to others. Thus we would suggest that your desire, your will to polarize in a positive sense of service to others, is enhanced when you give your attention completely to the resolving of difficulties and the enhancing of understanding, as much as is possible within the third density illusion. Thus, your will and your faith in the exercise of will to produce such growth are those qualities that will serve you well, whatever subdensity you are able to access in the shared experiences that you are blessed to have with all other selves that you come into contact with in each day's round of activities. For each other self is indeed not only a portion of yourself, but a portion of the one Creator that speaks to you in words not heard, in images perceived, and in the open heart, sharing the love of the one Creator in all things. Is there another query, my brother? They ask, thank you, quote, one from A2 who writes, in session 1413 of the Raw Material, Raw stated that George Van Tassel was contacted first by the Confederation, then the Orion Group. The Confederation was caused to find the distortion towards non-contact due to the alteration of the vibration mind complex patterns of the one called George. Can Quo please comment on what kind of vibrational mind complex distortions can lead one to become unviable for Confederation contact? And I would add to that, what kind of mind complex distortions or things we can do as a group to increase our viability to maintain contact with the Confederation. Quo says, I am Quo and am aware of your query, my brother. This is the query which is most salient for any type of channeling process that an entity may engage in order to be of service to others. The confederation of the planets in the service of the one infinite Creator has for many thousands of your years, as you would measure time, been able to utilize certain channels or instruments ranging back to those days of old where the prophets that are recorded in the Christian Old Testament were contacted by various entities of an unseen nature, and these prophesied various messages that were given to them. In those days, it was said that this was a holy honor and service to one's fellow beings to share such inspiration. However, at that time, there was, shall we say, a division in the type of information that could be received into those messages, which were of an inspirational nature and reflected the positive desires of the one Creator to bless the children of Earth with knowledge of their participation in the evolution of the population of Earth. And there were those of a nature that you would call service to self, who mimicked a certain power, we correct this instrument, a certain type of message that began in a positive nature, but as time and contacts continued, became that which was tainted, shall we say, by the service to self quality that would begin to turn the message of hope into a message of doom. This is a process which has echoed throughout thousands of years of human evolution upon planet Earth, for the confederation of planets in the service of the one infinite creator has itself utilized many instruments, as we may call them, to share the confederation philosophy that you are aware of through many contacts with our own group. The philosophy of the great original thought of the one creator becoming the creation that you now exist in, and has the purpose of allowing the creator to discover more of itself within each entity and each entity's free will choices. There is, shall we say, a balancing process that is of necessity in order to observe each soul's right to choose the option of the free will that requires that any type of positive information that is given through an instrument will be balanced by offering the opportunity for that instrument to be contacted by those of what you would call the service to self polarity. Thus, it is always appreciated by confederation sources when an instrument is aware of these two possibilities that might append from any channeling or transmission of information to an instrument. Thus, each instrument has the responsibility to determine the nature of any discarnate entity wishing to speak through it and to use it as an instrument. As you know from your own years of study of this phenomenon, it is well for each instrument to know itself so thoroughly that it has at its heart a quality that is most precious to it in the spiritual sense. This quality is that which is the foundation stone of the instrument's life path. It is that quality for which the instrument gives its life in joy and expression, and would, if necessary, gladly die for this quality rather than not utilize this quality. Thus, if the heart of the instrument is offered in a kind of challenge to any discarnate entity who wishes to speak through it, then any entity so wishing must be able to answer in the affirmative if it is able to speak through the instrument. The entity known as George Van Tassel was at heart most strongly polarized in service to others, and thusly began its contact with Confederation sources in order to build what was called at the time the Integriton, that had the potential of extending the life path of an entity of third density. However, the entity George was unaware of the necessity of being able to determine the nature of any discarnate entity wishing to channel through it. Thus, when the balancing effect was put into motion, this entity was approached by those service to self entities that for the beginning contact mimicked the positive channel, and then as time went on began to turn the entity known as George away from pure service to others. Thus, the Confederation source found the need to take its leave of the entity known as George so that it might exercise its free will as it chose. We thank you, my brother, for your query, and at this time we would transfer the contact. Austin asks, yes, we have another one sent in from L who writes, it seems that many souls find the catalysts of pain to be very useful. Our third density life today seems to offer constant opportunities to experience mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual pain. Can you help us better understand the catalyst of pain and its use? And is there also value in evolving without significant exposure to pain? Quo says, thank you for your query, my brother. We are with this instrument and will address your query. As in all things in your density, there is a twin set of attributes that belong to any situation, condition, or event. There is the understanding that there is honor and duty within every situation that you may face. These are related attributes that apply to the same situation or condition. For a situation could be seen as purely a duty or as purely an onus, one seemingly negative and one seemingly positive, although it is not so black and white. There are colorations within each of these sets of attributes pertaining to any situation. For out of duty, for example, a great deal of honor can be born. One can indeed produce the other. They can also coexist in any situation. The same could be said of the situation or condition of pain, which you speak in your query. It would seem that multitudes of pain exist, especially at this time upon your sphere. But we may point out that it is only seemingly so. When the entity can pause in a moment that even seems filled with only pain, pause enough to consider an enlargement of that moment, such that it could include more attributes, more feelings, more understandings, in addition to the one-dimensional view of it as only pain. For out of that pain can be born love and a new understanding that appears in the flash of an instant in the consciousness of the entity. Out of that awareness of pain, in another example, could be born the awareness of beauty or any other positive attribute. It is through the recognition that each moment is multidimensional that the entity can expand its awareness, its consciousness, and thus its spirit to understand that this is what growth is, the growth of consciousness in an ever upward spiral of understanding. Through the pain, for example, of witnessing in these times, we correct this instrument in what you call these times. What seems to be a laying waste of precious parts of your environment through wildfires or floods, through human activity, that things do harm the environment and the natural life that lives within that environment. This is from purely one viewpoint. Pain can be seen as painful to watch. Such things can lead to feelings of hopelessness or helplessness or other emotions, feelings of injustice. Yet, within that moment of the painfulness of witnessing such destruction of an environment, there is also another awareness there, because it could be seen that out of such pain is also born the honor and duty of correcting such situations and conditions upon your planet. And out of such awareness comes not helplessness or hopelessness, but hope and growth, a rising up of a new consciousness, a new awareness of what could be done. For out of that pain can come joy, the joy that some upon your planet may have for the very first time. The joy of understanding the preciousness of the natural environment upon your planet, the preciousness of life and of nature, those second density treasures upon your earth, where perhaps beforehand such entities never saw the preciousness before. For every pressure point within the entity's experience, pressure points that produce that pain of which you speak, there can come a wonderful expansion in new ways of some positive awareness that was not there before, that can literally change the consciousness, bit by bit. The greater consciousness of the entities upon your planet in a new and positive direction. And this expansion and growth of consciousness is part of the purpose of the entity's existence and continuation upon your planet. That growth upward in understanding and in love. Another example of this dynamic can be seen in a situation involving a self and another self, in which the pain of what one watching another in illness or one felt observing another self in a negative light. And we say again, within such situations are further gradations of awareness that can be found where entities look more closely. The pain between a self and another self, when accepted, understood, can open the consciousness of each, like a window opening where light and love can be let in. Even one small awareness, through compassion toward the other self, will allow the consciousness of both, of each of these selves, to grow upward in the light and love of the infinite Creator. In this way, we could see that indeed pain has a purpose upon your planet to produce an ever-expanding awareness of the possibility of love, beauty, joy, growth, and many other positive attributes coexisting, and which just need to have the light shined upon them and each entity's consciousness simply to open a little bit to let them in. We are those of Quo. We have addressed this query sufficiently, my brother. Yes. Do you have another query at this time? I do have one from Jay, who writes, it appears that ADHD and other similar mental disorders can cause havoc on a person's life in many ways, from disrupting relationships to being unable to remember information, to learning or being unable to learn, to having a grasp on common logical mental life. Does ADHD and other similar mental disorders have a significance on mind-body-spirit complex's journey? And is it a particular distortion designed for something important chosen by us before we incarnate, or is it a societal distortion? I am Quo, and we understand your query, my brother. The condition observed or perceived in some entities upon your planet at this time that has been labeled or described as ADHD or some similar condition, or in some similar form, may have indeed been chosen, pre-selected, if you will, by an entity before coming into a lifetime. And in that way, it can be seen to be serving a purpose not only for the entity who chooses such a vibration in its mind-body-spirit complex, but also for those around that entity as it is born and grows up and adopts a profession, a career, a lifetime of experiences in work and family and in friendships. The entities being mirrors to one another, mirrors of self and other self, do provide the purpose of increasing each entity's adaptability to each other. Each entity's ability to adjust to preconceived notions or tolerances that each may have, adjusting such that to allow for a different vibration to exist in another self or in their own self. For it can be understood that those with so-called ADHD have a certain vibration or frequency or pattern of biological, neurological behavior and thinking that is occurring at a frequency that is perhaps faster than the vibrations of entities around it. However, there are two situations we will mention regarding this. One is that the vibration or frequency upon your planet has been increasing and becoming faster in general. Those who seem to vibrate or operate at a frequency to themselves which is faster, more sped up, you could say, are in some way reflecting the faster vibration of your environment generally. They are attuned to that faster vibration, the faster pace of life, the faster frequency, the higher frequency that your planet is gradually becoming. Another idea we may speak of here is that in some cases those who have or are seen to be having ADHD are in fact vibrating at this faster rate, because this will provide a greater match to a particular profession or activity that the entity is planning to do in its lifetime. And in such cases, that faster frequency is serving that entity quite well. It will be the match that it needs to be that activity. An example of this can be seen in the person who, operating at a faster pace, seems to be out of step with those seemingly more normal around them as they grow up. But yet, if that young person, so quick at everything, so fast in its thinking and actions, may be then quite suited to becoming an emergency medical technician, for example, someone who has to work within seconds of time very quickly, doing several things at once and doing them well, and is operating at the faster frequency, able to do that profession and be a perfect match to it and save lives because of it. So we would say that if we could look at this condition that those on your planet call ADHD, look at it in a new way across the lifetime of a person and see or perceive perhaps that it has a purpose. It has a use to attune that person to the thing that will do in life in a most productive way. In fact, in a most excellent way. A final comment we would make upon this subject is that the consciousness collectively upon your planet is becoming aware of all the different types and speeds of mental and neurological abilities, all the different speeds that exist, and are becoming more able to allow for, to be tolerant of, those that may operate at a different frequency, whether it be slower or faster, more in depth or more upon the surface of subjects. All entities have their own unique way, their own unique frequency, and consciousness is growing to accept this, each accepting one's own portrait in frequency and accepting those of other selves, so that each can see the beauty of the whole, the beauty of the entire collection of entities and all their uniqueness, each one thus enabling more love and compassion to exist between and among entities, so that there are really no labels, no conditions that exist outside of norm. Rather, each one coming forth in this lifetime perfect as they are, and operating at the perfect frequency for their intentions in this lifetime, for the role that they will play, the purpose they will fulfill, the love and the beauty they will bring to the world and to themselves and to others. In another channeling from October of 2021, The group asks, it seems like in third density we cannot really know the truth through our thoughts, which are mentally formed symbols or conclusions colored by our past experience and biases. For example, a thought about a glass of water is a description, a symbol of it, and it is not something you can hold and drink. The thought of hope, likewise, is an abstract representation of a feeling that points to hope, but is not hope itself. There are a number of references in your messages that have told us that our current third density thoughts become things on a metaphysical level, and that this will happen more on the physical level as we enter fourth density. Please tell us about what actually happens when thoughts become things. Will our thoughts then be true? Would you please give more examples of a thought becoming a thing? If it happens to us now, or as we enter fourth density, what will that experience be like for us? I am Quo, and with this instrument at this time, we greet you in the love and in the light of the one infinite Creator who made all that there is. We are grateful to each of you for asking us to join you this evening, that we all may work upon our service to the One through speaking some facet of the words of the One in response to the query you have presented us. This evening, you ask a most interesting question. As your planet and its population move into that which you call the fourth density of love and understanding, there is more and more in manifestation. Those things, as you call them, those embodiments of concept, they become more real, more apparent, more effective within the path of the seeker of truth. For now, you are aware that as the query was stated, the thoughts that you think are a product of your intellectual mind. Your mind is the means by which you plot a path through each day's experience, and indeed, through your entire journey of seeking within this third density illusion for the length of your incarnation. Your mind is a magnifying glass in some respects, generating certain images, receiving certain images, using these images and perceptions to make sense of your daily experience, to attempt to understand, to use a somewhat lofty term, how the experience that you now have within your daily life may teach you what is the meaning of your life. How do you proceed upon this path? The thoughts that are your response to your inner questions are your estimations of the answer to your questions. They are more or less accurate from time to time. They give you some indication of the nature of your evolutionary process. They give you steps to take in this evolutionary process, one step after the other, whether in rapid sequence or in reduced pace of progression. These steps are the fruit of your intellectual description of how your spiritual journey may best be accomplished. However, as you are more and more aware of the changing nature of the environment in which you now move and live and have your being, you are aware that there is a fundamental difference in how your thoughts may aid you in this evolutionary journey that you share with your brothers and sisters upon your beloved Gaia. As she and you move together into that higher vibration that is the fourth density of love and understanding, it is apparent to many that the thoughts of the intellectual process are beginning to take upon themselves a kind of expanded reality, so that you ponder your journey, the nature of yourself, and the purpose of all that you experience. You attract to you experiences of an enhanced nature that become what you may call crystallized as gems of great price, of facets of information and qualities of being that heretofore were not such perceptions or experiences. Now you are engaging in a level of experience or reality that is more vivid, that is more to the point of the purpose of your spiritual journey, of your incarnational lessons. Each of you has, before this incarnation, programmed the means by which you would be able to open your being to greater and greater levels of fourth density vibrations. For each of you has chosen to incarnate during the time that has been called the harvest, or the graduation of souls into the vibration of love and understanding. It is that time now, within your incarnation and within the planet's clock face, shall we say, that the hour has come, and has been for some time now, to be able to manifest the product of your thinking, your thoughts and images that are of a spiritual nature and are able to enhance your evolutionary process. This is a grand event for all, as you are beginning to form that grouping of intelligence and spiritual essence that will allow you to join together as a social memory complex, where the experience of any is shared by all. The question posed this evening focuses on the changing nature of this dynamic between thoughts and things. We feel it is important to reinforce the nature of this question as arising more from the standpoint of the third density. The notion that thoughts become things is one intended to catalyze the third density individual to examine the nature of their thoughts and how they relate to those things that seem to manifest about one and within the creation of third density. This is an important aspect of this query, for such a question arises only when the true nature of reality is hidden by the veil of forgetting, and the underlying connection between one individual's thoughts and those things that may be manifest from those thoughts is hidden. In order to examine this mysterious dynamic, one may in meditation find the silence of the mind and begin to question the nature of the self that seems to produce thoughts. In this examination of self, it helps to begin with the notion that the self is but an illusion, and the distinction between self and other self, and between the creation about the self, is on the most fundamental level of creation, the product of this illusion, and especially within the third density, the product of the veil of forgetting. Yet this illusion is truly important for the evolution and experience of the Creator, for without the ability of the Creator to conceptualize itself as individual parts, and for those parts to adopt an identity that is separate from their origin within the Creator, it would not be possible for the Creator to have any experience at all. And so we suggest beginning by examining the illusion of the self, and the utility of the ability of the Creator to identify itself as separate selves, and then begin to question the true nature of thoughts as they occur to the self. For if the self is essentially illusory, then from where do the thoughts that occurred to the self come? Are these thoughts generated by the self? Or is the relationship between the illusory self and the thought that is realized by the self deeper and more connected to the creation about the self? This may seem like a rather difficult endeavor to understand, as we speak about it with clumsy language and through an imperfect instrument. It may be difficult to conceive that the nature of the self and the nature of thoughts are vastly different than you regularly experience in your day-to-day life. But we encourage you to attempt to release the identity of the self and begin to consider that if the self does not generate those thoughts that occur to it, then those thoughts have their origin from outside the self. The notion that thoughts become a thing implies a causal link and a progression, that first a thought is conceived by the self and subsequently a thing is formed from that thought. But when you remove the barrier between the self and the creation, then the causal link may appear to be much less linear. The experience within the third density of having a thought may seem to be abstract. And when the thought then unfolds into reality, it appears as though the thought preceded the creation. Yet since the self and the creation are indeed not separate, we ask you to consider that perhaps these two seemingly separate things are further linked, or more intrinsically linked than they appear to the third density self. And that thing that was born from the thought may not have actually been born from the thought, but the thought simply preceded the inevitable existence of the thing. When taking this view and perspective of the self and thoughts that can be quite difficult to grasp from a third density perspective, one may understand how, as the fourth density approaches upon your planet, this dynamic between the existence of thoughts and the creation of things becomes much more apparent to the self, and the notion that thoughts become things becomes less valid only in that there is a deeper understanding that they are not so separate. As your planet progresses into the fourth density and your peoples progress along with your planet, you will begin to realize more and more that the thoughts that seem to be generated by the self are indeed occurring simultaneously among many individuals. And as this experience grows and the relationship between groups who partake in the same thought deepens, the social memory complex begins to form more and more efficiently to the point where thoughts become more crystallized. And as more and more groups share in thought, they begin to perceive with more clarity the creation that lies before them that will unfold, not as a result of what thought, but as the path that has been perceived by that thought. Indeed, the concept of thought concerning oneself or entity, or many entities, can be seen as the building blocks, in a very basic way, of what will become your social memory complex. Thoughts that are part of the greater consciousness and share among the collective group of selves upon your planet are the beginnings of the connections that are made on the mind and the spirit level. What do you call existence upon your planet? Such connections between and among selves do form, do extend and reach out like beacons of light across the population of the third density selves, creating a community of thought. Indeed, this greater consciousness of which we are speaking is one important aspect of the idea of thought creating a new reality upon your planet. The power behind the thought grows as it is shared among the community, and as the thoughts harmonize due to the shared feeling among the selves for that thought to grow in a certain way, a spirit of the cultivation of positive and productive thought grows as well. This is indeed a foundation of the growth of a social memory complex. Regarding the notion of a thought becoming or translating into a crystallized thing, of which we have spoken here this evening, there is an understanding that the thought in its mental and emotional state is made of energy, an energy projecting from and remaining a part of the self which produces it, which is also made of a spiritual energy, if you will. The energy that makes up each individual's field, auric field, personal field, is generated by the mind-body-spirit complex in all its constituent parts. The energy centers constitute the basis of the frequencies and tones that make up each individual and color the thoughts that are produced by the individual. Some may be more feeling thoughts, such as love or hope, and some may be more mental thoughts that are more constructs. Each type of thought does indeed, if persisted in, become more and more crystallized over what you call time in each individual's experience. And collectively, this can be shared across selves in the community of consciousness of which we spoke earlier. These various types of thoughts have their own energy, their own frequency, and therefore form things that reflect that particular type of energy from which they were produced. These things can come into the form of events, actual items found, created or manufactured, or other creations of one could say of an infinite nature, for thought is infinite and each entity can realize all things are possible through thought. Again, knowing that thought of whatever type is made of a pure form of energy helps to understand that all things are indeed possible, for energy is infinite and malleable, creative, and of what you may even call a blessed nature, given that it is from the one infinite creator. We would give a final thought through this instrument, speaking to the questioner's example of the thought of hope, and say indeed that hope begins in the hearts of all entities as an energy born out of the great original thought of love from which all things come. Hope is a pure form of thought, an ideal similar to the thought called joy or love or peace. And we say indeed the more the shared community of selves begin to focus their thoughts, their energies upon such high ideals, the more the greater consciousness of the planet shall be advanced into the higher frequencies, which shall yield more of the same, in a higher form of physical crystallized creations as well. A thought is a very fundamental kind of concept to consider, wrapped up so intricately into identity and illusion and the birth of the creation itself. On your level of experience, a thought moves across the screen of your inner awareness contained within and known only to your mind. It would seem as it's experienced on its most elemental level. In the intimate setting that for many of your people seems to occur within the head or the skull, where most of your entities find themselves in compulsive, unending, almost uninterruptible patterns of thought, one following the other. Indeed, many of your entities seem to be run by thought, recognizing not what is being obscured or hidden by this runaway train passing through the mind, of beingness of open, endless spaciousness, and of the love and the light that lives therein. Thought on your level is an image or a reflection or a representation of some aspect of reality. Those images and reflections often fragmenting that reality and constructing the walls, the boundaries, and the distances between entities, creation, object A and object B, in order to create an illusion. Much in the way as the questioner described, the thought seems not to be the thing. And from the standpoint of separation, that is indeed often the case, whereby the thing being thought about seems separate in one way or another from the exercise of reflection through the process of thought. Yet we ask the seeker to consider the nature of that thing being thought about, whether the thing is an emotion, an experience, a material object within the world, something of intimacy of the self or between self and other self, and ask if that thing or object or experience is not also thought itself. Examine the nature of all of that which appears to your senses, outer and inner, and ask to what degree those things have solidity, substantiality, and substance. Is it so easy to call one category thought and another thing, or that which has free-standing existence outside of thought? To look more closely at creation and its interrelationships and its way of coming into being, and to trace that to the genesis of all things, the seeker may recognize that it is all in its own way thought. The Confederation gives a name to this concept in order to communicate it to you: rational entities in third density. We add some descriptive adjectives, and they're to give this thought its proper placement and significance in your own thought structures, and that term is the one great original thought. Without that thought, there is no creation. There is no experience of self and other apart from an infinite and indivisible mystery of unity, which has no discernible quality or boundary or spatial or temporal aspect. From this ineffable mystery comes a thought, which is that the Creator can know itself through an exploration of manyness, and thus is the first gift of consciousness made. That begins or commences what you in your patterns of recognition may see as a sequence that continues and expands and distorts and moves through stages, you may say, in unbroken sequence, to eventually think into being through the additional use of thought galactic suns, solar system suns, and eventually through this progression the thought of the third density entity, that which is your station at this time. You, as Ross so poetically described in their very first session with the trio, are dancing thoughts in the mind of the Creator in a ballroom where there is no material. Though you reflect upon yourself and feel a vessel of clay and your various attributes liked and disliked, and your binding to geography and circumstance and biographical limitations, which all seem so very solid, are, from the greater perspective, a thought in the mind of the cosmos, much in the way that a thought as an entity of its own limited will lives inside your mind. And in this way, you as a third density entity can seek the linkage in the logoic chain, and how you as a third density entity are identified by us as the Confederation as a sub-logos, for you have within your capacity these same abilities to wield and use and harness that thought, which is both creative and destructive. How does that thought become a thing? On its own level, a thought is already a thing. It has a lifespan of its own. It is colored by its particular host as it's experienced and enters the awareness, but has an identity that is at once independent of the particular mind within which it finds itself. It has a form or a shape as you might perceive it. On the level of time-space, it can be made visible, you might say, and interacted with, but it becomes a thing, as we have spoken to through previous instruments, through the process of manifestation, often unconsciously so, though a thought can certainly be consciously developed and pursued through inward and outward action. Consider where a collective of your entities holds a thought, say a prejudice toward this instrument, smiles knowing that his spouse would correct his pronunciation, toward a minority or other disliked group, and in the way in which that thought creates a space then for it to become a thing, shall we say. Not necessarily an object like a chair, but to become manifest as an activity or action, say as a demagogue who utilizes and embodies and puts into motion this thought toward the persecuted group, or the way in which the thought of unhealed or unprocessed anger may manifest itself as the bodily condition known as cancer. To speak of the ways in which thoughts become things in fourth density is out, though addressed previously, is outside of the scope of this circle and this particular instrument's capacity and time. But we may indicate that such a statement is also a way to describe how one creates their own reality with the aid of, or hindered by, as the case may be, the experience and use, skillful or otherwise, conscious or unconscious, of thought. And as fourth density removes the veil and clarifies the nature of the self in relationship to their thoughts and the thoughts of all other selves, then it becomes much clearer how thought manifests reality, or how reality which emerges is expressed and reflected in thought. And as your third density light wanes and the fourth density light increases, the loop between that which seems to exist only on the level of thought and that which manifests within, the individual or the collective body, or indeed the planet itself, becomes shorter. The progression accelerates. Thoughts today are reality tomorrow, and so forth. And before transferring this contact, we would suggest, as always, to the seeker, they engage in that activity which brings the mind to a point of concentration, whereby they are not being pulled this way and that by their thoughts, where they are entering into the silence and stillness of beingness itself, where there is no thought, that which you call meditation. This is necessary to the well-being, not only the well-being of the self, but the rediscovery of the wholeness and perfection and the truth of the self beyond and prior to thought. We are most pleased with the progress that each channel has made this evening in transmitting our thoughts that are regarding how your thoughts may become things. As you become more and more the one creator, your thoughts become your experience, and as they guide you through this octave of being. We thank each of you for making room within your minds for our thoughts to become that focus that gives you the ability to create a channel for not only our words, thoughts, and images, but for the Creator to move into your daily experience as you move into communication with those about you, communicating the love in the light of the One to all you meet. At this time, we shall take our leave of this instrument and this group. We leave you in the love and in the light of the one infinite Creator. We are known to you as those of Quo, Adonai, Vasu, Boragas. Now, I believe that these channelings were just fascinating in every way, shape, and form. The concept of sub densities fascinates me. They seem to imply it's other dimensions within the third density that help expand our seeking towards the one Creator. I thought the question was answered sort of elusively, and I still don't quite understand what the seven densities are and how they integrate with our understanding of the Law of One. I also found it very fascinating that George Van Tassel, in channeling the Confederation, at first was great. We have some George Van Tassel episodes forthcoming from the very beginning when he started channeling the Confederation. I found them to be very fascinating. But it makes a really important point, and I'm not naming anybody in particular, but I see it all the time. In particular, people that post channelings in my group. And there's one in particular that comes to mind that people may know who I'm talking about. But it seems like a positive channeling. Oh, it's wonderful. But then it's doom and gloom and negative every time. And if that's the case, it's likely that what you're channeling is from a negative source. And it's really frightening. You get a lot of people that are channeling online all the time, and they are not aware of this. The Law of One allows for a balancing effect, meaning that if you're challenging a very powerful positive entity, and then all of a sudden they seem to change a little bit, and you're not aware of it, it means that you're channeling another entity, that they start to sound and act like the other entity, saying, we come in love and light, saying loving things, and then just sort of slowly, carefully throwing this in it there. There's a specific date where something terrible is going to happen. Or be aware of something terrible happen. There will be an invasion soon, or there'll be a crisis, a great shift is about to happen, or a flood is going to happen. And every time you can see the way the channel changed. You can see it in Barbara Messiniak, in her Pleiadian channelings. And it's in other channelings as well, where they start really positive and powerful, and then they turn negative. So if you feel like a new entity has entered, if you're channeling, you should challenge it against whatever you consider to be your highest. Carla Rucker would always say, do you come in the name of the Holy Spirit? And if they said no, she wouldn't channel them. And that seemed to be pretty effective for LL Research. They always are channeling, and they're always challenging entities that come in that they have never channeled before. You can see that in many of the transcripts, like the La Lima transcript. But I find that fascinating, and I say that it's important for you to interpret channelings with this in mind, that whenever someone's channeling, at some point in time, they're going to have the negative come along and try to channel through them. And if somebody doesn't know, they're inviting it into their lives. It happened to George Van Tassel. He was this positive person who was receiving positive channelings, and then slowly was corroded when another entity started channeling through him. And if it's a doom and gloom type of scenario with the channeling, even if there's some accuracy with it, then assume that it's a negative channeling. We saw this A year ago, when there were all these ridiculous things about the cabal and terrible revolutions and evil aliens and invasions that were occurring that seemed to be a part of a lot of conspiracy theories, and in fact, all of that was just BS from negative channels that were trying to act like they were coming from the light. You see people that talk about child trafficking and how terrible it is and how they're overtaking the earth and these evil people. There may be truth in all that, but if the channel changed from a positive message to a negative one, where all they're talking about are the negative entities around, they're actually channeling a negative entity. The final thing is the discussion of thoughts as things. Maybe my favorite from Quo. Quo does not do as good a job as other channeled entities about discussing reality creation, perhaps because they're coming from a different perspective where they're already automatically creating reality. But reality creation is a fundamental and important part of understanding third density. And as we move to the end of third density, shifting to the new earth, our thoughts become reality faster and faster, as they say here. But the bigger revelation here is that the thought that you're thinking may not be coming from you. And there is a separation from the thought coming into your mind and then becoming a thing. And so what we're exploring as we move into fourth density is the relationship between the thought in our mind and then it becomes crystallized in reality. And I believe that that is an important discussion when we understand where these thoughts come from. And they also imply that as the social memory complex begins to think in unison, then greater realities are created with the power of multiple thoughts. So I would love to get your comments on this, your impressions of channeling or sub densities, or the idea that thoughts become things. In any case, you can find all episodes of The Reality Revolution at therealityrevolution.com, and welcome to The Reality Revolution.